The next two slides are just examples of ground movement. This is the port of Kobe, and you can see that the seawall basically here is moved out into the Osaka Bay, and you can see a lot of how the ground is dropped down here. The port of Kobe was actually just disabled by it. Next slide. This is kind of an interesting picture, and I didn't actually understand it when it first happened, when I first saw it. This is 1989 in the Marina District, and you can see a real complex pattern of cracks in the ground here. And what's happening here is a phenomenon we call ground oscillation. And what happens is after the sand starts to liquefy, if it doesn't have any place to go, as the seismic waves pass through that soil, it just sloshes around. So that even though you may not have the failure of a seawall or something, the ground can be horribly disrupted by it. And this is capable of breaking pipelines. And it was probably responsible for a lot of the pipeline breaks in the Marina District, which occurred at the boundaries of the sandy fill. And so what was happening was the ground was sloshing back and forth against the good ground. And so it just ripped the pipes apart. But it's a phenomenon that probably isn't too well appreciated because it, until recently, was not very well understood. Next. Okay, are there engineering solutions? Well, you can well imagine that in a city like San Francisco, with real estate as valuable as it is, that a lot of effort has been made in trying to figure out how to stabilize soils. The next one. And I might mention in Japan, where they have similar problems because they've done so much filling with sandy fills into their bays, they've invested a lot in these what are called ground improvement techniques. And basically there's two approaches. One is you can strengthen the soil, and you can do that by compacting it or injecting material into it that basically glues it together. Or you can provide drainage so that the water can come out. In that case, the ground won't be able to flow, but you're still going to have water discharging from the ground. So basically what you're doing is not allowing those water pressures to build up so that the ground becomes weak. Next slide. And the last question I'd like to answer is the regulatory or legal aspects. In California, after the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, it was realized that we could predict in a general way where liquefaction might occur. And the next slide. So the state legislature passed a law that mandated that the California Geological Survey provide maps in urban areas that delineated both liquefaction areas, these areas in green, and blue areas on hillsides that can fail as landslides during earthquakes. These maps now are used by communities that have them to mandate to any development in these areas that people do special studies. It's not a guarantee that you will have liquefaction in these areas. The criteria that are used to delineate these areas are fairly general, and for example, one criteria is that it be fill. And it leaves it up to the person doing the building to determine whether or not it's a sandy fill or a clayey fill that has liquefaction. But importantly, next click, if we look at the Hunters Point area, you can see we have a lot of area that's been mapped as a seismic hazard zone, potentially susceptible to liquefaction. And again, I have to reemphasize, this isn't a guarantee that you will have liquefaction. It just mandates that a special study be done. Next. This is parcel E2 to help you get located. And next one. There actually was liquefaction in these green areas in 1989. Ironically, we didn't map any in the E2 parcel, but you can see a couple other locations where sand came to the surface. There was actually a lot of ground movement at one of these sites. So we know at least parts of these fills in Hunters Point are susceptible to liquefaction. And the last slide is just sort of a summary. Liquefaction is a hazard not only here in Hunters Point, because we had it in 1989, but it's a general hazard in San Francisco. So you have a large community of geotechnical engineers who are familiar with it and have been addressing this problem for a long time. Most of the fills that liquefy tend to be older fills that were placed before 1964, because our knowledge of liquefaction was pretty thin, and we didn't realize that we could actually be creating a liquefaction problem when we dumped sands into the bay. Probably most importantly, though, there are geotechnical methods for identifying these liquefiable soils, so that when one does borings into them or soundings, one can actually do tests that will tell you what its liquefaction potential. And even more importantly, once you've identified the problem, there's a large body of techniques now that are available to actually remove these. If you had just a little bit of liquefiable soil, you might actually remove it. But when you're dealing with a large body of soil, usually the approach is to improve it. That is to strengthen it, to make it so it won't liquefy under the design earthquake. And with that, I'll